was one of the most remarkable achievements in human history. Just 66 years after humans first lifted off from the surface of the Earth in an aeroplane, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon. The machines that carried them, the technology and engineering that made it possible, represented the most expensive peacetime mobilization of national resources ever undertaken. This is the story of Project Apollo and how humans got to the moon. In late 1960, Americans elected a new president. Young and charismatic John Kennedy had warned on the election trail about the challenges posed by the Soviet Union. The Second World War had ended 15 years earlier, leaving the world divided between two superpowers, the Soviets and the Americans. History's previous rivals had contented themselves with dominating the Earth's land and sea and the skies above. But now technology had opened up space as a new area for competition, and the Soviets were winning. In 1957, the Soviet Sputnik satellite was successfully put into orbit around the Earth. Americans were shocked, and worse was to come. Shortly after Kennedy's election, in April 1961, 27-year-old Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin was blasted into orbit on spacecraft Vostok 1. The era of human spaceflight had dawned. Determined that the USA would not cede space to the Soviets, President Kennedy announced a massive spending increase for the US space program. And 1 month after Gagarin's flight, he told the United States Congress that he was committing the nation to landing a man on the moon before the decade was out.
These are extraordinary times, and we face an extraordinary challenge. Our strength as well as our convictions have imposed upon this nation the role of leader in freedom's cause. Finally, if we are to win the battle that is now going on around the world between freedom and tyranny, the dramatic achievements in space which occurred in recent weeks should have made clear to us all, as did the Sputnik in 1957, the impact of this adventure on the minds of men everywhere who are attempting to make a determination of which road they should take. I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
But that was easier said than done. Kennedy's announcement kick-started the greatest burst of innovation and engineering in human history. In early 1960, the US space agency NASA had launched a project to build a rocket that could put 3 men into space, with a view to eventually orbiting and possibly even landing on the moon. It was called Apollo. Named after the Greek god of light, the men behind this project wanted to see humans riding through the heavens like Apollo on his chariot. It was this Apollo program that Kennedy now seized on. It was to become the focus of an unprecedented national mobilization of effort. At its peak, it would employ 400,000 people, involve over 20,000 companies and universities, And it all cost much, much more than the Manhattan Project, which had split the atom and created an atomic bomb during the Second World War.
This is a watershed moment for our species, the Apollo program. It's the point in history where, to push back the frontiers of science and exploration, it's no longer enough to be an elite individual or even a small group of elite individuals. You need this army of people melded together with technology and science, and together that complex entity is necessary to be able to make any progress at all.
Scientists considered various ways to get humans to the moon and safely back again. They explored the idea of blasting several rockets into orbit, where they would combine and go to the moon. Another idea was a drone rocket which would land on the moon and allow the astronauts to transfer into it to get home to Earth.
So now they need a rocket big enough to lift your vehicle, and a larger vehicle from the Earth to the moon. They need to travel faster because you need to go close to 25,000 miles an hour to escape the escape velocity of the Earth, to get yourself all the way to the moon. When you get to the moon, you need to work out how you're going to land on the moon, how you're going to split your vehicles up. They choose this bizarre architecture. They choose to do this thing called lunar orbit rendezvous, which means that you send one big rocket, 2 vehicles, all the way to the moon together, and then you split those vehicles up. You land one on the surface, and then it has to come off the surface and back up into orbit around the moon. They have to get together, and then they have to come home. And all of this is just absurd. In 1961, all of these things just are the stuff of pure fantasy, and yet they do it all. They do it all in the course of that decade.
The men who would travel in these spacecraft were healthy, tough young test pilots with thousands of hours of flying experience. They would be operating the most complex vehicle in human history in an environment where there was nowhere to crash land. 32 men were chosen. They underwent thousands of hours of training. Underwater to simulate a low-gravity environment. And on newly built simulators, endlessly running through different permutations, situations they would encounter on the mission, including scenarios in which things went wrong, to see if the astronauts could save themselves and the mission.
How will it feel to run on the surface of the moon, where the pull of gravity is only 1/6 that of Earth? The National Aeronautics and Space Administration is seeking answer to this question.
Unsurprisingly, the complexity of Apollo led to delays. The first manned mission, Apollo 1, designed to test the command and service module in low Earth orbit, was eventually scheduled for February 1967. But that proved too soon. In January 1967, during a pre-launch check, a surge in voltage ignited an electrical fire which spread in the oxygen-rich pressurized cabin and killed the crew. It was a terrible reminder of the dangers of the project, the vulnerability of the astronauts, and their total dependence on a vast army of technicians.
But it's not just the astronauts. The astronauts are just the tip of this gargantuan iceberg. It is the tiers and tiers and tiers of people who follow it. There are the flight directors, the flight controllers, but there's the backrooms technical support. There's the guys out in the factory. The success of the mission depends as much on the guy who puts the foil insulation around the legs of the lunar lander as it does the guy who's behind the desk in mission control. If anyone screws up, everyone dies.
Following the fire on Apollo 1, there were further delays. Some thought the project was over. But in late 1968, Apollo 7 blasted off, taking 3 men into an 11-day Earth orbit. A hugely ambitious Apollo 8 followed, taking 3 men around the moon. Apollo 10 saw Thomas Stafford and Eugene Cernan detach the landing module from the command module and descend to within 15 kilometers of the moon's surface. Apollo 11 would take the next step and land on the moon itself. The men chosen for this mission was the commander, Neil Armstrong, command module pilot Michael Collins, and lunar module pilot Buzz Aldrin. Armstrong was chosen as the man to lead and to be the first to step on the moon because NASA management saw him as a superb pilot, but without a large ego.
Man, 60 seconds. Best recorders, high speed. Check all batteries.
At 9:32 local time on July the 16th, 1969, a Saturn V rocket launched Apollo 11 from Launch Complex 39 at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The giant Saturn V rocket remains the tallest, heaviest, and most powerful rocket ever. It still holds the record for the heaviest payload ever put into space. The crew's families watched as they took off, alongside 1 million other spectators. Monitoring equipment recorded Armstrong's heart rate doubling to 110 beats per minute as the rocket climbed. After 12 minutes, they were in orbit around the Earth. After 1.5 orbits, the crew fired the engine, which pushed them onto their trajectory towards the moon. The journey from Earth to the moon went smoothly.
Can you tell us, it appears to us that there are 2 distinct cloud formations trending east-west, one approximately about along the equator and one around 30 or so south latitude. Could you tell us exactly where those cross the land masses over?
Three days later, they arrived in lunar orbit. For 24 hours, they prepared for the final stage.
If all is going well, the service module engine will be fired, slowing them enough to go into lunar orbit.
At 1744 Universal Time, on the 20th of July, Armstrong and Aldrin in the Eagle lunar module separated from Collins in the command module and began their descent.
It is at this point that Armstrong and Aldrin crawl through the connecting tunnel into the lunar module. After aligning their guidance and navigation systems, the lunar module's engine is fired as a braking maneuver and to regulate their descent.
The most dangerous stage of the operation had begun.
And it's the period of mission, that 13-minute period taking them out of lunar orbit onto the moon, that Armstrong most worried about. He said on record, it was rampant with unknowns. I was worried about it. And, this is a guy who doesn't worry about much. And he was right. Armstrong and Aldrin are coming off. They're going down to a ridiculous vehicle. It looks like nothing on Earth because it's never meant to fly on Earth. It has no aerodynamic features. They're inside it. It's a thin-skinned vehicle. It has to be light. It's so thin-skinned that if you took a pen, you could stick it through the skin of the vehicle. That's what they're in. That's what they're sealed in to protect them against the vacuum of space. And they're coming down. And as soon as they start into that descent, things start to go wrong. So Armstrong was absolutely right to worry about the 13 minutes because everything happens. Communications start to play up. And Armstrong says, we'd rehearsed everything. We hadn't rehearsed bad communications. They track their progress across the moon's surface, and Armstrong knows that they're seeing some of the lunar features too quickly. Some of the craters and some of the mountains are coming up too quickly. So he's going too fast. They're going to miss their landing site. And that's important because if they come down in the wrong place, they're going to damage the vehicle. They're going to get onto the moon, and then they're going to get off of it again. And then if that's not enough, then they have problems with the onboard computer, which they absolutely depend upon. They can't fly this vehicle on their own. They need a computer to assist them. And that starts to throw up error code after error code after error code. And then if that's not enough, as they get close to the surface, Armstrong has to take some control back from the computer to try and manually effect the landing because they're about to come down in a boulder field. And he very nearly runs out of fuel. He gets down to about 20 seconds of fuel, 30 seconds of fuel before he actually sets it down. And everyone in mission control thinks, well, we're done. We're not getting to the moon today. We might crash. He still lands it. It was an incredible 13 minutes.
We're go, same type, we're go. Altitude, velocity, light, 3.5 down, 220 feet, 13 forward, 11 forward, coming down nicely, 200 feet, 4.5 down, 5.5 down, 60 seconds, lights on, down 2.5, forward, forward, that's 40 feet down 2.5, picking up some dust. 4 forward, drift into the right a little. Good. Okay. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. We copy you down, Eagle. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
At 2017 Universal Time, on the 20th of July, Armstrong landed Eagle on the moon. In mission control, the technician monitoring fuel estimated that they had just 18 seconds remaining. It was the first time in history that humans have landed on a new world. They had touched down on the moon, but there was little time to celebrate.
And here's the thing. When you land on the moon, your problems are far from over. So actually what you hear in the mission audio is them saying, we've landed. After the landing, they've got the stay, no stay decision. So just because you've landed on the moon, can you stay there? Or are you going to need to take off instantly? They didn't know what the moon was really made of at that point.
Okay. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The LEM footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder.
Was the vehicle going to sink? Was it going to fall over? If they were on a slope that was too steep, they were going to have to lift straight away. For the first few minutes after they get there, there's a furious work rate for them and the mission controllers trying to make sure that something awful isn't going to happen and they're going to have to just get the hell out of there.
For For the next 3.5 hours, the crew checked their status and prepared for a lunar surface walk. They had to put on all their kit because once they opened the hatch, the entire vehicle would be depressurized. Armstrong began his climb down to the surface at 02:51. His life support equipment meant he almost got stuck getting out. Ghostly pictures were broadcast back to Earth as, at 02:56, Armstrong stepped onto the moon.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Aldrin joined him and described the surface as magnificent desolation. They spent around 2 hours on the lunar surface. They raised the American flag, filmed themselves, collected rocks, some of which had never been found before on Earth, and talked to President Richard Nixon on the White House telephone. Then they re-entered the spacecraft and closed the hatch at 05:01. They rested for 7 hours before Houston woke them up for their return flight. At 17:54, they lifted off.
Roger, understand. We're number 1 on the runway. 7, 6, 5, work stage, engine arm ascent. Shadow, beautiful. Very smooth. Very quiet ride. There's that one crater on there.
The rendezvous with Columbia went smoothly, and they began the return journey to Earth. This final section of the mission was also potentially very dangerous. They had to hit the Earth's atmosphere at precisely the right angle. A few degrees either way, and they would bounce off it and head off into deep space, or burn up upon re-entry. Their angle was correct, and although there was incredible stress put on the capsule, they splashed down in the ocean at 5:44 on the morning of the 24th of July. Humans had travelled safely to and from the moon. But perhaps even more inspiring is what the Apollo program taught us.
I mean, it's really important. The 20th century, if it taught us anything, it taught us that if you face a complex problem, but that there's no fundamental obstacle to it, if it's an engineering problem and you throw resource at it, then you solve it inside of a decade. The Apollo project, President says we'll go to the moon in 61, you're on the surface of the moon in 69. So yes, it tells us something really important about us, about the problems that we face now, which is if there's a will and it's just engineering, we can get there. And I feel there's an important lesson 50 years on